Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, it's Mark Graban. Welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. It's episode 513 for August 21st, 2024. My guests today are Brade Jevons and Stephen Dargan, co-authors of the new book, Leading Excellence, The 5 Hats of the Adaptive Leader. So in today's episode, we discuss the key concepts of adaptive leadership, the importance of understanding individual team members, cultivating psychological safety, and the 5 essential leadership hats: inspire, train, support, coach, and direct. Brade and Stephen also share some real-life examples and applications. They talk about the significance of the leadership shadow, and they emphasize the critical role of serving others and helping them grow as a way to drive organizational excellence. So you can learn more about them in the book. Look for links in the show notes, or go to leanblog.org/513. Hi, welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. I'm Mark Graban. Our guests today, joining us from Australia, are 2 of the 3 co-authors of the upcoming book titled Leading Excellence, 5 Hats of the Adaptive Leader. So we're joined today by Brade Jevons, who's been on the podcast before, and Stephen Dargan. The third co-author for the book is Chris Butterworth, and the book should be available, or will be available, in August, I should say. And the Kindle version, even right now, as we're recording this in the middle of May, the Kindle version can be pre-ordered on Amazon. So, Stephen, I'll say first, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thanks, Mark. It's lovely to be here. And obviously, it's 6 o'clock in the morning over here. So I've had my coffee and ready to go.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Bright
Appreciate you taking me bright and early. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you had your coffee. My morning coffee is worn off as it's 6 p.m. Eastern. Hopefully, I'm not too brain dead or tired at the end of the day. But I think this will be a lively discussion. And so I'm looking forward to it. And Brade, I'll say welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be back on the show, mate. And thanks for the opportunity to chat on this book. As you know, writing a book's a labor of love, and it's great to get out there.
Yeah, well, you're almost at launch. So a lot of the hard work is done. More hard work ahead, but you're almost there. So I'm excited for you both. Let me read a little bit about the bios of the authors. First off, Chris Butterworth is a multi-award-winning author, international speaker, and Shingo faculty fellow. I saw some pictures. I know he was at the Shingo conference in Orlando last week. Chris is co-author of 3 Shingo publication award-winning books: 4+1, Embedding a Culture of Continuous Improvement, The Essence of Excellence. And this is an interesting title. If Chris was here, maybe I'll get him some other time. I would ask him about this title. Why bother, with a question mark? Why and how to assess your continuous improvement culture? Stephen Dargan, also who is joining us here, he's a diverse and inclusive, customer-centric, driven transformational leader with 20 plus years of leadership experience spanning Australia and Europe. Stephen is a Shingo Institute Alumni, a Shingo Facilitator and Examiner. He's a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and is a certified Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. And then Brade Jevons is a senior leadership coach focused on helping improve leaders and their organizations, helping them create a better future economically, socially, and environmentally for future generations. So that maybe answers the question, why bother?
Yeah, it's about how do we make things better, isn't it? But why bother is very much on that. Why bother to do all this too? And why bother to do that effort to make it, better in that regard?
Yeah. So, and we'll come back and talk about why bother writing a book, but that's a good challenge and a good thing to tackle. But Brade is host of the Enterprise Excellent podcast. I've been a guest, and he's author of the book Agile Sales: Delivering Customer Journeys of Value and Delight. And we probably talked about that 3 years ago, feels like last month, and it also feels like 20 years ago.
Yeah, for sure, Mark. It goes quick, doesn't it?
Well, especially in these times. So, but that was episode 416, June of 2021. So in that episode, I had asked Brad about his lean origin story, and we might get the short version in a minute. But first off, Stephen, I was going to put you on the spot here. If you can tell us, what was your lean origin story? How, where, when, why? Did you get introduced to this, and why is it so important to you?
Mark, it's like a game of two halves with me, Mark. I think for half of my career, I've been leading large sales teams across many different industries in Ireland, and moved to Australia back in 2010 as an economic refugee post GFC. So tried a new lifestyle in Perth, and managed to get into financial services here in Australia. And when I did, again, I was back into the old, tasked with setting up businesses or going in and turning businesses around. But then in 2013, I was lucky enough to get involved with doing my Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, and got introduced to Shingo and his teachings, and Chris Butterworth. And that's where we first met. And Chris became almost my mentor for the last 11 years on all things continuous improvement and mindsets and behaviors. So it's like a step change in my career, because I found my purpose, Mark, and it was something that really drove me forward. So ever since 2013, I've been, beating the drum on mindsets, behaviors, and particularly on leadership behaviors. And it's something I'm really, really passionate about. And, seeing the true potential in every single individual is one thing that drives me forward. So writing this book was always on the agenda. And Chris and I have always spoken about doing in fact, you mentioned why bother. In fact, we had a title, Why Bother in the Financial Services. But we never got around to writing that book. And we just, lots of learnings along the way. I applied for Shingo Prize, and it's probably one of my greatest failures. I cherish most in that we didn't get the prize, but the learnings we got from that we brought forward and step change and improvements in what I'm doing now. So the opportunity was there to write the book, and I just grasped it with two hands. And Chris then introduced me to Brad, and we it just evolved very quickly. And we just three of us had like-minded attitudes, and it was one thing that we all just were really passionate about. So it just flowed from there.
Mm-hmm. I don't know much about financial services. What would be some of the answer to why bother with lean in financial services? Specific business challenges, or
why financial services, particularly, Mark, is pretty much widget driven. Like it's a large customer focused, customer-centric business, yet most organizations in financial services don't think of their customer. They just think of processing widgets through queues and through service level agreements with no focus on the true customer experience. So why bother when you come around to why bother doing assessments and maturity assessments? There's not too many financial services companies worldwide that have embraced the Shingo principles and moving forward with those, because so I think we were one of the first. I think Commonwealth Bank Group in Australia were the first Shingo Prize winners of silver medallion, and I think it was 2015, Mark, that they got a silver medallion for one of their collections and recoveries centres, and they've seen a huge shift in their customer experience and obviously their cost base and colleague engagement. We were the first ones in Western Australia to go on a Shingo journey, and taking a business that was underperforming, just ticking along to global best in class within 3 years was probably one of my proudest moments as a leader.
And you talk about kind of the shift in your career, or being introduced to lean 11 years ago. It probably makes you think about times before learning about lean, and what might have been, or it probably helps you better navigate helping others kind of come around and make the same leap that you did.
I think for me, Mark, I was always a leader that always was trying to find a better way of doing things. And when I moved to Australia, I was tasked with setting up a couple of business functions. And that's how I ended up in the lean side, because the Commonwealth Bank at the time, back in 2012, 2013, went on a really aggressive productivity journey. Part of that journey was that they would take senior leaders out of their functions, functional roles, and train them up to be Lean Six Sigma black belts. And then the idea was they would place them back in those roles to drive that mindset and behaviors through the fabric of that organization or their function. And I was lucky enough to be one of those leaders to be selected. So I was always a leader that really kind of always tried to make tomorrow better than today for both our customers, but more importantly, our colleagues, our frontline people, because they're the ones that are delivering the experience to customers. So I was always had that kind of natural ability to want to be better.
Yeah. And I've found, I mean, what your story makes me think of is, leaders who get exposed to lean and they get excited and they here's some language, here's some frameworks like this, it feels very comfortable, intuitive of like, well, this is how I was trying to lead. And now maybe there's some other tools or methods that help you better down that path that you were already, where you were already leading that way.
Yeah.
Or with those
and look, yeah, and I think, I am a Lean Six Sigma black belt through University of Cardiff and SA Partners, but I'm not a purist at the heart of when it comes to lean, and that's why I think I was really passionate about writing this book. We three of us wanted to get a book that wasn't theory based and was applicable to every single leader, regardless of what capability you have, whether you're an aspiring leader or an existing leader, whether you're in the corporate world, sporting world, or even in the non-for-profit world. It's a book that it's not even a book. It's a manual. It's a practical guide to help leaders improve, their own mindsets, behaviors, but also that of their teams and the people around them.
And Brad, maybe I'll bring you in here, and we'll talk more about the book. When Stephen's saying, "Well, it's not a book," well, it is. But what I hear you saying, or maybe Brad elaborate, it's not a book that you just read and then put aside. It sounds like more of a guide that you would work your way through in different ways. Brad, tell us a little bit more about the structure of the book.
Yeah, we frame it up, Mark, with the key concepts we've worked on at the start, and then it really goes into real life applications right there, because there's a lot of case studies in that section where we're bringing in the frameworks we talk to. And then the rest of the book really goes into heavily, in the field, experiential, how do you apply it? How do you do it? Case studies galore across many key aspects. And it's very much that book that is about the critical part that leaders play in actually achieving a lean journey or an excellence journey. And that's what we've really worked to do. But at the same time, we've partnered with a lot of the award-winning leaders, both in sport and also business, to really get their stories. And what's funny with it, Mark, is how much of it just lines up. It's not like you didn't even have to alter anything. It's not like you had to try tweak it to bolt it in. It was what they did was just best practice leadership. And that was a beautiful thing.
Yeah. We'll come back to that. We're going to take a dive into the book, and Brad, maybe I can give you this opportunity to tell whatever version of the lean origin story that you would want to tell. Maybe listeners are new to the podcast; they didn't hear you 3 years ago. Go ahead and tell your story and how that's different than Stephen's.
Well, I think the interesting one, Mark, is a bit of the similarity. Around that same time, I also connected with Chris Butterworth, and the mission I was on with a company which was Signet and the Winston Group at the time was, how do we make transformation stick? How do we make lean stick and sustain for the longer term? And I got connected with Chris and also Peter Hines, Dr. Peter Hines.
Yep.
And both of those guys became really mentors to me. Same story as Dargs. They just helped us so much. And so I guess I'd come forward to now, and it's just such an honor to write a book like this with Chris. It's a bit of a pinch yourself type moment. And but my journey also went into the world of agile heavily too, as you know, Mark, from us talking in the past. And that is just really lean applied to the technology world. There's so much overlap. Jeff Sutherland, the creator of it, basically openly says that. He studied Taichi Ono, he studied all that and created that path. And I think that position out of that agile world brought a key concept to us about the book, that one of the key aspects in the Scrum Guide or in anything to do with agile is about leaders who serve. And if you go that element of leaders who serve, it was that foundational piece that we went, right, that's if there's one key ingredient, that's the key ingredient to sustaining an excellence journey is leaders who serve in the shadow they cast. And so that's sort of then what brought us to this place here. And I was having dinner with Chris, I don't know, 2-3 years ago now. And I said, Chris, we need someone to stand up and write a book on this place because, you know, there's a lot of one-hit wonder type leadership books, which are great. You know, they're good, you know, but no one's really done anything in recent times. Apart from Dargs, I was thinking of Legacy, you know, like what James Kerr did, where that is comprehensive, but it's written purely from a rugby position. I think that's one book that really covers what do we need to do as leaders. But yeah, I was talking to Chris and I said, I got this idea on leading excellence. I think it's a great name. I think someone needs to write a book that is more comprehensive on the position of leadership. And then Chris ran with it, dragged me in, and then brought Dargs in. And Stephen. And it's just, that's Stephen's nickname, everyone. So if you hear me slip, but it's it was just amazing the knowledge that got contributed. Like, to me, it was just the epitome of teamwork. You know, right back in uni, I was studying Toyota and the power of teams over the individual, you know, and I just saw it play out this book, and it was awesome.
Yeah. So talk about the book, and, you know, the book, you've already started touching on it. You know, the book is a countermeasure, if you will, to different problems and challenges out there. You know, so to dig into problem statements a little bit, you know, in the book, one thing you write about is employee engagement statistics. And this seems to be a global problem where, you know, measured, and I mean, it's not inaccurate measurement. It's really just the experience of what employees are facing leads to disengagement, very low engagement. What are some of the factors that you've identified and that you write about why engagement is so low, and that's not even just a new problem?
I think, Doug, you're right if I take this one. I don't like with that Gallup survey, Mark, it was just an eye-opener again, because we see it in what Dargs and Chris and I have done assessing organizations, helping organizations. We call it the leadership shadow, right? We can see this leadership shadow. When it's strong, it's great. When it's not strong, there's weakness. And then you look at we had our sort of theories on what we were seeing, and we combined that. But then you look at the Gallup survey and they just said the same thing. Main contributor was the lived experience with your direct leader. That was like number one, is my experience with my direct leader or manager. And then the other contributing factor that we've really put forward, that we've seen and they've also seen, is that, do I have a meaningful goal and do I feel I can make a difference at work? Or am I just showing up to work to punch out widgets? And that's the two key contributing factors. And that became the basis of the whole book, really, was, okay, well, how do we do this? Because the other statistics that's interesting, you look at the companies that are the highest performing, fastest growing in the world, they nail high engagement scores. Like, their engagement scores are off the charts. Why? Because every employee is moving the company forward. Every employee I shouldn't say every, but a lot of the employees in those companies have a meaningful goal. They feel they can make a difference. They're chasing towards it. They've got good leadership practices in there that are focused on growing people's capability, and they're nailing it. And then you go, the ones that aren't performing so well, they've got low engagement. There's one caveat in here, and I believe that caveat is where you've got like a bit of a monopoly type of situation, you know, like such a scale of business that their momentum is so big that their culture and this position, they still make money despite it. But I don't know if that's going to sustain into the future. We're seeing a number of those Goliaths struggle, and I think that will just get worse as we go forward if they don't lean into this type of piece that other companies have succeeded with in such a big way.
Yeah. And Brad, maybe you or Stephen, feel free to jump in at any point. Talk more about the leadership shadow. That's an interesting phrase. If you can kind of elaborate on that in both, you know, the positive shadow that's cast, or times when that shadow causes problems.
I'll let you go, Doug.
Oh, look, you know, when you look at the leadership and what it takes to be an effective leader, I mean, the shadow is really important, because they what they do, what they say, what they coach, their actions, their words transpires across the whole organization. And if you look at a couple of the case studies that we have in the book, there was one particular case study where it was a financial services organization, and the team was pretty much at a low, just tipping along, and a simple system of reward and recognition that was put in place. The leader came in every single morning, and their shadow was to go and spend time walking around the floor, saying hello to every single person that was there on the floor, and not just saying hello to them, but actually connecting to them to what was going on in their own personal lives. Yeah. But the second ritual that they would do every day, Mark, was they would simply take the customer experience feedback from the previous day. They would look at the feedback, and they would understand who was the colleague that dealt with that particular customer. And then, Brad mentions about connecting to a higher purpose, but the leader would then send them an email or physically go and thank them for, connecting to the purpose, for delivering that brilliant customer experience. And that simple recognition, it's not necessarily about the reward, but that simple shadow of recognition, every single day ritual that was done, started to permeate the whole organization. And the whole leadership function then underneath, which was about 28 leaders, I think, at the time, all started to do the same behaviors every single day. So it almost created this environment of recognition and connecting people to the overall organization's vision and purpose. It's simple repetition, reinforcement, Mark, leadership behaviors that really drives, because people look up to the leader. They see and watch. They emulate everything the leader does. So if you're a leader that just is, cares about themselves and not cares about their people and, not cares about their organization and just tries to, play the political game in an organization, they're going to get found out very, very quickly by their people. Their people won't follow them. But if you're an authentic leader and you're vulnerable and you've got that humility as a leader and you've got that shadow and of care and respect for your people, then people will start to follow you.
Right. Yeah. Because that's a reflection of those behaviors.
Correct.
Of the leaders, or the leaders they see every day, or at least frequently.
Yeah. Mark, there's an interesting case study we've got on it too with in Australia, there's a super coach called Wayne Bennett. His stats are unbelievable, like rival anyone in the world as a leader and coach. And he has one simple saying, which is talk's cheap. It's what people see you do and how you make them feel that counts.
Yeah.
And he lives by that, and that's that shadow. It's like, well, what behaviors do we exude to cast a shadow to actually inspire people and make them feel inspired, but then also help them grow and become the best they can become.
Yeah. So in the US, we say you've got to walk the talk. I was in Quebec last week, and I learned they have more of an expression. The feet have to follow the lips.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there an Aussie way of saying that that's even different once more, or would you say walk the talk also?
We'd know of walk the talk, know of both of them. It's just, do what you say is probably a very common saying here. Yeah. So it's simple stuff, isn't it? But I think the challenge that we've all got is we've all got a challenge of habit. And I think the biggest challenge with our habit is typically our habits are programmed to serve ourselves. We are wired to do things that make us feel good and provide us that positive feedback and experience. And that can, but really to be a leader who serves, it's about our behaviors about truly serving the growth of the other person.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. I think, I know I could probably think of a million occasions where I've served my behavior rather than serving the other person. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we're all facing to truly get excellence out of an organization.
Yeah. And I think where to go next. There's such a rich topic, and like, no, I'm gonna hold that topic of servant leadership maybe till later, even though that might be a common thread in what we're talking about. But I want to go back a little bit and hear your thoughts. When I hear this phrase employee engagement, or people lamenting that the engagement is low. Like we're all authors here, so let's talk words. Engagement is, in a way, it's a noun. That's the thing we're measuring. How much engagement is there? I think there's an old habit where leaders might blame those employees for not being engaged. I'm like, I don't think it works that way. Like engaging others. Now we're at a verb. Engaging, actively engaging leads to engagement. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'm oversimplifying it, but no. I'm curious what you think about the behaviors that that you've seen that lead to that result of an engaged workforce.
For me, I'll jump in here, Brad. But I mean, just from my experience, and those people who know me know I'm not a fan of annual engagement surveys, because they're a lagging metric, and sometimes generally they're used for senior leadership to make them feel closer to their people. But in fact, if you are a true leader who serves, you should know how engaged your people are, because you've created a psychological safe place for them to speak up and make a difference. So, when I look at why people, if you look at the mining industry in Australia, for argument's sake, the recent CoreLogic data suggests that 30% of people leave the mining industry, or they might leave their employer because of ineffective development planning. And we see that quite a lot, right? When you don't develop your people to their true potential, they leave the organization or they get disengaged. An example that we have in the book is, contact centers, right? Contact centers are generally the poor cousin of any organization, right? They're not treated with their entry-level roles. They're not treated with the same level of respect. But yet, they touch the most number of customers every single day, and, upwards of 1,000 customers a day. So I classify them as the heartbeat of your organization.
Yeah.
So when you get individuals that come in to be contact center roles, I try to say to them, you're not just a contact center agent. You have the massive potential to appreciate and value in this organization. So what is it that you really want to do in 3 years' time as an individual? Do you want to be in contact center? That's fine if you do. Or do you want to go and develop into product development? Or do you want to go into change management or finance department, or any different, there's hundreds and hundreds of different roles in any organization. And if you have a leader who truly understands that and shows the way, almost like gives them the guiding pathway to all these different pathways as such, their eyes start to light up, because they're no longer seen as an entry-level role or the poor cousin of the organization. So when you start to create a really strong development system from your entry-level roles, you start to become the nursery of really good, strong talent across the organization. So you no longer get seen as entry-level. You're seen as the golden goose that lays the golden egg for the organization. And then, especially when you create really strong systems, then you can identify gaps of capability gaps across your organization and go, hang on, we need people in coding, for argument's sake, because it's a future skills gap. Okay, well, let's look at the contact center. Is there any people in the contact center that we can actually develop through into those particular roles? So I think, it's that when you start to get people and start to develop people for their true potential, you get them to come to work each day, their true authentic selves, but also giving 110% commitment. That, coupled with the reward and recognition system, as I spoke about earlier, as well as, keeping them fully engaged in what they're doing. Obviously, as well, people come to work as well, not to just do work. They love to affect change. So, a supporting continuous improvement framework, allowing them to ideate and change new things and make things better tomorrow than they are today. And, celebrate failure as learnings, and, no longer slaps on the wrist for making mistakes. So when you start to create the culture, engagement levels will follow. Your attrition rate will fall dramatically. Your unplanned sick leave, which is the greatest barometer, unplanned sick leave is the greatest lever. It's a leading metric to, a poor performing culture. So, Mark, very passionate about that particular subject, so I could talk for hours on it. I don't think we have enough of the podcast.
Well, we could always do another episode and dig deeper into some of these topics. But I mean, you touched on a couple of topics that are incredibly important to me. One is the ability to learn from failures and mistakes. And I think a foundation of being able to do that is, as you mentioned, psychological safety. And I think you gave the right definition of it. If you feel safe to speak up, you are feeling a sense of psychological safety, and we want more of that. We have more participation, more improvement. But I'm just curious some of your thoughts or lessons around the behaviors that help cultivate psychological safety, cultivate engagement. Maybe there's a lot of overlap there, but
there is a lot of overlap, and I think as well, it's back to the previous comment about leadership shadow. Okay, so back to the Edward Demings of this world, and 95% of people come to work each day to do a good job. 5%, 95%. It's 95% of the defects are in the system or process. Never blame people, blame process is my mantra. So if people make mistakes, leaders should be going to look at, well, how did that mistake actually happen in the first place?
Right.
What was the system or process that led to that? Did we not train them effectively? Did we put too much pressure on their environment? Was the environment for that individual, whether that be intrinsic or extrinsic interference around that individual? And there's a formula for high performance in the book, which we won't go through today. We can touch on today, but is there intrinsic or extrinsic interference surrounding that individual? So don't jump to blaming the person, because generally 95% of the time it's something that we have done wrong as a leader. We haven't supported those individuals and we haven't served them well enough. So I think that's how you start to create psychological safety, when you start to have that leadership shadow of never blaming people, blame process, and going to seeking to understand and help me solve this. We made this error, right? Let's learn from it. Let's celebrate the failure and what do we learn from it, and make sure. And that's when you start to do that, your shadow and then your leaders all start to do that. That also starts to create that psychological safe place to speak up.
Because back to habits and leadership habits, a lot of leaders, I think, have been taught, or they seem to have figured out that, well, they'll say we have to punish mistakes, otherwise that's giving permission to make more. And well, if you don't share the mindset that you articulated, Stephen, and I feel very formal calling you Stephen now that I've learned that you have a nickname, but I'm going to go with Stephen. And I sidetracked myself with that side comment. That's what happens at the end of the day. But we're talking about right. So you have a choice, though. If they don't share that mindset of most everybody wants to do good work. They want to do quality work. They want to have pride in their work, as Dr. Deming would have said. Well, no, people aren't if it was an intentional. If it was an intentional act, that's not a mistake. There's a different word for that. Sorry that got so garbled in my attempt to both make a comment and joke around.
But again, if you go and start to look at the interference, right? So generally, some people are make mistakes, right? So and some could be deliberate, but generally speaking. I classified again in the book. There's a couple of different scenarios where the individual's purpose is not aligned to the organization's purpose. So when somebody is not connected to the overall organization's purpose on a completely different path, well, generally their behaviors are going to be quite different, and they're harder to change. So that's when you may need to use your coaching hat to, put on the coaching hat to go, okay, this organization may not be for you, Mark. So, what is it? What is your core purpose, and what are you aligned to, and what's your true north? And then let's work with you to try and understand what are the best types of industries or roles that best suit you. And I've done that before. And people have come back to me and they've left the, financial services industry and found a niche in some other industry and have come back and thanked me for actually, helping them see where they should be as a person. Very, very rarely people go in to deliberately do work, do bad things in work. Very, very rarely.
Right.
Generally, if somebody makes an error or mistake, there's something going on. And I talk about in the book about everybody in this world, Mark, has some form of interference in their lives, no matter who you are. And that interference is broken up into two things. It's either intrinsic interference, so things they're grappling with, whether that be mental health issues, lack of self-confidence, afraid to speak up, anxiety, depression, all those type of things that stop people being their true authentic selves in work. And then you got your extrinsic interference, which is, things that happen externally in the environment. Their leader putting a lot of pressure on them, production over safety concerns, domestic violence, financial abuse. I myself had my own interference when I was, when I was a general manager of a financial services organization. I had a 16-year-old teenage son who was quite difficult at the time. And those who have teenagers can resonate that. Myself and my wife were arguing all the time and almost like drove a wedge. Now, he's come good, thankfully, at the end of it, as they normally do. But that was the external interference for me. And that was, hard to deal with at the particular time, as well as some internal interference that I had. So generally, as leaders, though, in the old command and control architectures of organizations, if someone's behavior or performance dips, we generally go and put them on a performance improvement plan or slap a coaching plan on them without truly understanding the context and the environment that person is working within. So I try coach leaders to try and understand the intrinsic or extrinsic interference first. And then, if you can try and identify that, then what I like to use the term, you dance with that interference. You put support mechanisms in place to help that individual. And when you do that, you start to create that psychological safe place again, and performance starts to shift, and you feel that your frontline person or your staff member starts to feel more connected, and will work harder, not because you ask them to, because they want to.
Yeah, and that makes me think of some good general lean thinking about not jumping the countermeasures, the performance improvement plan, the PIP, or whatever coaching or whatever disciplinary process. Like, do we really understand? I appreciate, Stephen, that you're talking through the causes and root causes and contributing factors. Make sure we understand that first.
Yeah, we also send them back into, an organization or system that has probably 60% waste built up into the system. As you know, Mark, and most businesses have upwards of 60% waste and failure demand, as I like to call it. So, as leaders, I'm not a fan of one-to-ones. The typical one-to-one is, what did we do well last month? What are we going to do next month type of conversation. Yet then we're sending them back into a system that's fundamentally broken. So, the way I like to do my one-to-ones is let's go and look at, your working environment and how do we improve that? How do we improve the systems that you're working in to make them more effective and efficient so that you're coming to work each day to enjoy yourself and improve.
Yeah. So, Brad, let me maybe turn it over to you and come back to this this word serve. So we might think of servant leadership or other ways of describing that. In the book, what do you and the co-authors mean by leaders who serve? Why is that so important right now?
Yeah, so I think, Mark, the easiest way I can describe it is to add the extra words on the back of it, which is leaders who serve the growth of others. And that's as simply put, is my behavior serving the growth of others, or is it serving myself or something else? And there's a lot of external, extrinsic forces coming down on leaders that can easily turn them to a place where they're purely serving other factors versus really focusing on serving the growth of people, which ultimately then serves the growth of everything else. It's like this fulfilling type of position. And what we write about in the book is it links back, like the legend of this space originates with Ken Blanchard with his work on situational leadership. What we've done now, which really comes from Darg's work and what he's just shared, is that we believe that leaders nowadays just need to get good at pausing, controlling their emotions, number one, pausing, looking at the person. And the bit that we've altered is we believe they need to think about the context surrounding them. Like, it's not just the situation, we need to think about the context surrounding them, which includes what's going on, but it also includes everything else Darg's just spoke about and more. So that's sort of the evolution of it that we've added, is that to be a leader who serves, the one thing we got to be good at is controlling our emotions, just make sure we stay in conscious thought, and then look at the person, think of the context surrounding them, and then choose our ideal behavior or the best behavior to help them grow, not to serve our feelings. And that's the simple formula that We do expand on a bit more in the book, because when you come about the position of how do we control our emotions, that's a big gig. But we've had the help of neuroscientist Dr. Mark Williams, who wrote The Connected Species on that, and a legend in organizational psychology called Laurie Skander. They both really lent in and helped us look at those drivers of emotions. And so that's what we've then developed, this concept of the core belief system. And so that's another element of the book.
And that makes me think a little bit of thinking of a Shingo conference. I had the opportunity to see the late Stephen Covey, speak at that event, and to talk with him briefly. And he was, one of the things he was talking about was, as you were calling it, a pause, Brad. Putting in that separation between stimulus and response.
Yeah.
That we can pause. We can try to get better at, myself included, pausing and then choosing how to react instead of reacting in just a very instinctual, reactive way.
It's the secret. And you're right, Mark. Yeah. Like Stephen Covey is that 7 Habits where he brought that up, the gap between stimulus and response. That's the key. So what we're saying is that really that pause is critical. And I've got to admit, for leaders listening to this, and this is what I do, it's my kids that I get the best practice with on this. So for me to practice it every day, I just practice it with my kids, because there's no better situation to really lean into that. But it is, if you can nail the pause by controlling your emotions, because if your emotions are riled, the pause is not going to happen. And if you're riled emotionally, or you're riled even too positively emotionally, you're not going to be conscious, because your conscious brain shuts down in that position, and you're going to be following a habit. Now, there'll be a percentage of the time that your habit actually is quite close to being the right behavior. But there'll be a fair chunk of the time that your natural habit is not the right behavior to bring out the best in that person. Yeah. And on that, Mark, I think the best case study I've been so proud to write is on that super coach Wayne Bennett out of Australia. Like this guy's he's been coaching for 50 years, won so many tournaments for so many teams, so many countries. He's won series for 4 different countries as a coach. And this is in rugby league, which is like gridiron without pads and a helmet. So think of gridiron without pads and a helmet, pretty brutal. Yeah. And he is a master at understanding the person right up front, building trust and psychological safety, and then really being an adaptive leader by adapting his style to suit them. It's amazing.
Yeah. So you answered the question that I hadn't quite gotten to yet, of being an adaptive leader, but I think you drew that connection to situational leadership. And I'm not as familiar with the Ken Blanchard work, but I'll go back to Dr. Deming again, who I do remember very clearly writing that managers, leaders need to manage each person in their team like the unique individual that they are. So that makes a leader's job more difficult when you have to, you actually have to get to know your employees and what makes them or us tick, and why everyone's not going to react to the same style of coaching or motivation, right?
Yeah. And Mark, that's the thing I love about this world we're in. All these concepts are not really new. They go back to Deming in the 40s and Drucker way back, or who's the guy that wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People? Carnegie.
Dale Carnegie. Yeah.
And I guess all of us as authors, we're repackaging and tweaking and adding bits to it. But it's funny that, like, humans are humans, aren't we? Like, I don't think it matters if it's the 1930s, 40s, or now. It just comes down to organizations or a connection of humans and things. And the more that you can really help get the best out of all those humans and things by really growing them, that's the secret sauce in an aligned way, with purpose and culture and strategy. And which is where I love being able to write this book, because it's the things that hang around Lean that make it all work. There's so many beautiful tools and techniques in Lean. They're wonderful. Yeah. But it's all this stuff that actually makes it work and sustain, which is what's so beautiful about it, really. But once leaders and organizations can really lean into this, it helps them put effort into a direction that truly gets results. Whereas so much effort's gone into agile, lean, when you're just tools focused, and so much money only to have it just drift backwards to pretty well what it was, you know?
Yeah. Well, think of what happens when an organization copies tools or methods. I mean, there are many stories about copying an andon cord system from Toyota. You can buy the cords, the lights that go off, the chimes, like none of that is proprietary technology to Toyota. I mean, maybe they've cobbled a few things together, right? But you can go and buy equipment like that. But then the factories that have installed that equipment and then without psychological safety for the employees, when they get yelled at and blamed and punished for daring to pull that cord, they learn not to pull the cord. You know, so the problem's not the employee. Or I know if you were to take somebody from a Toyota plant and put them in a different environment without that same leadership style and culture and psychological safety, that same person who out of reflex would reach up and pull the andon cord at a Toyota plant would probably also learn quickly, no, don't do it here. It's some other workplace.
I think, Mark, a lot of ex-Toyota people become consultants in lean, you know, and I know a lot of them struggle because they don't understand the power of the culture they had through leadership. And a lot of them will go into an organization and say, let's just put the andon cord in and just put 5S in, and then it doesn't work and it causes grief and all sorts of carnage is going on. And what they don't understand, because they were oblivious to it because they lived it, they were part of that culture. They didn't, it's like they don't, a lot of them don't properly understand that. Like, you're trying to do something in a place that does not have the culture that you had, the leadership shadow that you had at Toyota. You know, you've got to get that right and work on that. And then you can start really getting everything else to start to get results.
Yeah, very true. Stephen, what are some of your thoughts on, you know, if we aspire to be an adaptive leader, a situational leader, what are some of the things that people can do to develop that ability?
I think, you know, it certainly, you know, it starts with, you know, the formula, I think, that we have in the book. And Brad mentioned earlier around James Kerr's legacy. And for the listeners that don't know, it's probably one of my favorite books, leadership books of all time. Very passionate about it. It is the 15 principles of the New Zealand All Blacks. Again, another type of rugby. It's the proper rugby, as I say, not the rugby league, because I'm a rugby union fan.
Come on,
but it's how they sustained a high level of performance and culture over many, many years. And you know, they start with what's called character. And the Sydney Swans are another AFL football team here in Australia. They have a term called no dickheads, and excuse the term, but that essentially means you want good people on your team. You want people who have really sound, you know, have your back at all times. They're not white anters. They're not going to be passive aggressive people. They're going to, you know, be with you, you know, through thick and thin. And they're good people that, you know, good people make good employees, and good employees make good customer experience for your customers and shareholders.
Yeah.
The next thing is around behaviors, right? You need ideal behaviors. And, you know, when you talk about this, you know, when you read the book, you'll clearly see that ideal behaviors drive ideal results, right? So how do you create ideal behaviors and also measure those behaviors through your organization? And the next component is vulnerability. You know, having leaders that are vulnerable and not afraid to say that they're okay to fail, and you know they don't have all the answers. So being that vulnerable, and I got talking about my own personal story on that one, which I won't go into today, but it gets quite deep and meaningful because I went to a very low place in my career, and that vulnerability, when I started to show vulnerability and speak to my teams about my scenario, it almost, you know, created a state of psychological safety, and they almost they saw me as human, and not as a leader. So their performance lifted the minute I started to show my vulnerability, which is why that piece is in the formula. And then the interference, which we spoke about earlier. So I think as any leader, is even just focusing in on those, that formula will try and get them to, will help them to get to really understand, as Brad said, the context and the scenario surrounding that individual, and then look to work towards how do they actually put support mechanisms and help that individual through to, help them through to becoming a high performing individual. So that's one thing. And then, looking at, development systems, how do you create talent from, develop your people through their true potential? So I think, there's lots of things you could do, but looking at those particular two things will be a good start. And there's many hints and tips through the book. So, there's different systems that you could use, but they'd be the main two that I would focus in on.
Yeah. Well, again, we've been joined by Brad Jevons and Stephen Dargan. The book is Leading Excellence: 5 Hats of the Adaptive Leader. I know I'll get an opportunity shortly. I haven't had a chance to read the book, so I've got to ask, because I don't know. And for the listener, don't blame me for not prepping on this. I figure I didn't have the chance, and I could ask it here. What are the 5 hats referenced in the subtitle?
So what we've done with the 5 hats, Matt, is just look to bring it back to 5 simple things. So the first one is wear the inspire hat, which is like what Stephen's talking about. How do you understand someone's purpose and direction and their goals and their values? And then we call it the core belief system, their core. And then how do you connect that to the organizations, and does it align, and how does it line up to the organization's core, the organization's purpose and values and principles or behaviors? And then the next hat is the training hat. Like, we believe leaders as trainers. If you're going to be a leader who serves the growth of others, well, a key part of that is training. How well do we train? So if you're looking at the person and considering the context around them, and you're like, they're new, they just really don't know. We haven't trained them, and they're in a pretty good space emotionally. So potentially, I've just got to train them. So that's the training hat. And then the next hat is the support hat. So this is that, again, links back to all of what Stephen's saying, when that emotional position's in play, understanding those internal and external factors that can be impacting them, and being really good at active listening and empathy and even vulnerability to lean in on that. The next hat, of course, is the coaching hat that there's so many books written on coaching, but I guess what we've looked at with the 5 hats, we think there's more than just coaching. That to be a truly great leader who leads excellence. And the coaching hat is very important, because that gets people to think, that gets people to find their own way and really, really grow. It's like the superpower. And then the final hat is actually, we got the direct hat. We do feel there's a place to be direct. Safety situation. You don't coach in a safety situation. You just get the person out of the way, or get the thing out of the way and contain it. But also, if you do see your culture being broken in a massive way, you don't walk past it. You may be more direct in that situation, and actually, go straight at the situation and open up the conversation. And so they're the 5 hats that when we say, look, it's about being a leader who serves the growth of others rather than yourself. To do that, you've got to be really skilled at pausing, staying in a good emotional state, pausing, considering the person, the context surrounding them. And then what we've provided for is these 5 hats that we believe, if you can build your capability in these 5 areas, and I guess as a leader, when you're looking at it, you'll be stronger in some and not so strong in others. And that's where it's not like you got to build everything at once. It might be like, well, I'm outsourcing training at the minute. I'm getting the training department to do it all, or someone else, and really it's not effective, right? Maybe I need to do a train the trainer course and build my capability as a trainer. So that's where the 5 hats comes in, just to really simplify and put it all together. And we feel that the hat concept, although it's been used before by many, we just feel it's a great analogy, because you need to be able to swap and change between these hats, which really, Dargs, you brought that thought to us, mate. I think I'll just hand over to you for a second, because I think it's something you've always used in your leadership language.
Yeah, it's back to that understanding the environment, and pausing and reflecting and going, okay, because again, back to the Edward Demings, I think he's one of my favorite quotes: "Don't blame people, blame process." So how do we look at the surrounding environment of that individual and select the right hat? First take check of our emotions, and get our emotions in check first. And, you got to do this sometimes in a split second, Mark. So it's not an easy thing to do. But that's the learning as a leader, is you practice. And, as Brad says, practice on his kids. It takes a lot of time and practice to do it, especially in today's world of VUCA. It's fast paced, and, leaders are expected to make decisions and react very quickly. So, the hats, analogy gives them that little tool to be able to go, right, pause, have a think, what's my emotions, and then what's the understanding, what's the interference or environment look like before making that reaction.
Yeah. And VUCA, for those who don't know it, and I'm struggling with it at the moment, volatile, uncertainty,
complexity, and ambiguity.
I got hung up on the A. Ambiguity.
Yeah, ambiguity, yeah. And Brad talks about 1930s. For leaders are dealing with a whole new realm of challenges these days with social media. You've got entry level. I forget what gen we're in now, Mark. I'm showing my age now, but the 20, 19, 20, 21 year olds coming into the workforce, their whole world is different, right? They communicate through text and social media. So how does a leader adapt to dealing with that, face to face, and, don't assume as well. When I was a leader of an organization previously, I assumed that everyone knew how to do emails. That generation don't necessarily know how to do emails. It's just as basic as that. So it's just, the leader has to continually look to evolve.
Yeah.
It is challenging. It's not, leadership is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
No. It's a privilege. But it's not easy.
Yeah. It's well said. So, when you talk about these 5 hats, Brad and Dargs, I'm going to call you Dargs now. I feel like we've gotten to know each other here. That you're going to do, I'm sure, more podcasts or more webinars, and you've got to get yourself the hats, put on the actual hats.
Yeah, definitely. That's a definite step. That's an
improvement opportunity, Mark.
It's 5 hats. That's doable. 5 hats for each of you. So, I'm excited about the book. Congratulations to you, or at least on the progress so far. I know you still have work to do, but I know you'll get that over the finish line, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to really have a good impact.
Thanks so much, Mark. Really appreciate it, mate. And thanks for all the work you do with the books you write too, mate. I guess we're all just trying to get the knowledge out there and help people create that better outcome, mate. So thank you for having us on.
Yeah. Thank you both for being here. And Dargs, I wouldn't know it was your first podcast. So I'm going to tell the listener that now, because they'll be surprised too. This, like I said, the first of many, but thank you for being here and being with me in the audience today.
No, I really appreciate it, Mark. And thanks to all your listeners as well. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.